This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome and Xin Chào. Today, we're on the road in Vietnam. This is the second podcast we've done on location after our first in Romania for podcast 21. I'm in Vietnam teaching journalism to current network reporters, producers, photographers, and managers. What a great excuse for exploring a new country. My 60th. We're podcasting right now from along the Han River in Danang, a large city in the central part of the country. Our guest today is Gee Nguyen, who's been my translator for my time here in Vietnam. Gee, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you.
So first, let me ask you the three questions we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
First, what is the biggest discovery you've made while traveling?
Well, the biggest discovery I've made while traveling would have to be the time when I was in the United States. I spent 5 years in the United States as a student, 1 year as a cultural exchange student in high school, in my senior year of high school, and 4 years in college. And the biggest discovery that I made while in the States when it comes to traveling was that when you travel to a place, you really have to spend a long time there to really understand the culture and the people and the lifestyle. You can go travel to a place and spend, a week to see the tourist spots, to see all the landmarks, but to really understand them, the core values of the people there, the lifestyle there, you have to spend. I would say try to be, if you're going to go to anywhere, if you can, try to spend a couple weeks in that place and do what the local people do. Eat what the local people eat. Go to places that tourists would not know of, and then you will really understand why people do what they do in that area.
And where did you go to college?
Augustana College in Illinois.
And do you feel like the Illini, you now understand them?
The Illini, what?
The people of Illinois.
The Illini, right. Well, honestly, I have to say the United States is one of those places where it's so large that every different state and really like any city has its own unique thing. So the college I the college I went to, Augustana, was in the Quad City, which is on the border between Illinois and Iowa. It's in the northwest area of Illinois, and Chicago is about 3 hours away from us. So I have a lot of friends who go to school with me who live in Chicago, and at spring break or Christmas, I would go to their families and stay with them for like a week or two. And I find that in Chicago, the people are different from the people who are in Rock Island, where my school was, who are also different from people in the suburbs of Chicago. So what I find is that even though you can say there is a general characteristic of Illini's, I would not try to characterize them as one group. I would say people are different, anywhere you are in the world.
Fantastic. I love that insight. What is the favorite place that you've been to while traveling?
The favorite place that I've been to? That's a really difficult question. I don't know if I can give a precise answer to that.
You don't want to pick favorites.
Yeah, it's very hard because every place has something that I like. For example, when I was in the States, I traveled during my time off of the school year to places like Texas, to New York, to Washington, D.C., and like everywhere I go, there would be something that I really like about it. For example, in New York, I really love the business, the hustle and bustle of it, and like I would not want to live there necessarily. I don't think I'll fit into that hustle and bustle, but just the feeling of being there and seeing everything move around you so fast, it's quite an extraordinary experience. In Washington D.C., you get so much history, so much heritage. to the country with all the museums, with the monuments. So that's another side, right, to the United States. So I don't know if I can pick one place I've traveled to that is my favorite, but I can tell you that wherever I go, I'm still a Hanoian. Everywhere that I go, I still look back at Hanoi and want to go back, want to return. It's just that feeling of being home, you know, that you don't get that feeling in like the first week, but when the second week comes, then you start feeling like I'm missing something in my life. Maybe, you know, it's the food, maybe is the traffic of Hanoi, which you have seen, which is not great, but I still miss it. You know, it's part of my life, it's part of my routine. Maybe it's the friends, maybe it's the family, but everywhere that I go, I still look back to Hanoi. So if I had to pick one place, I would say it's Hanoi.
I think no matter the language or the country or the people or the culture, I think a love of home is pretty universal.
For sure.
Where's the next place that you're traveling to?
Next place I'll be traveling to would be for my work. I'm going to start a new job.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the job will bring me to Ho Chi Minh City, or a lot of people know it as Saigon, in the south part of Vietnam, southern part of Vietnam. And I'll be there for probably a week.
Great. In fact, that's where I started my journey here in Vietnam. I'm spending a total of 6 weeks in Vietnam teaching here, and it's been really a rich experience. For our listeners who have not been to Vietnam, tell us a little bit about this country.
Well, there's a lot that you need to know about Vietnam. First of all, when you think about Vietnam, probably a lot of people think of the war. That's the biggest impression that people would get, is the Vietnam-United States war. Vietnam has changed so much since that time. We are, you know, no longer a poverty country. We have developed much, you know, we have seen much progress in the 40, 50 years since the war ended. And so Vietnam now has cities like Ho Chi Minh City, like Hanoi, like Danang, which is where we are, that are very developed, that when you come to visit those cities, you probably wouldn't think that it was a third world country. So just the first thing that I want to tell people about Vietnam is that if in your mind Vietnam is still a post-war country of poverty, then you need to see the Vietnam of it is today, because you will be pleasantly surprised to see what it has become. Now, that does not mean that Vietnam still does not still have a lot of its natural beauty. We have a lot of big cities like Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, and Danang, and Nha Trang, great tourist spots. But also for local people like me, we would go on trips to places that not many people not many foreign tourists would go to, like the north mountainous region. You can take.
And for our listeners who are wondering what this putt 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 sound is, this motor behind us, there's this cruise, almost like a dinner cruise boat, and it is absolutely decked out in lights and neon, and it's going down the river right behind us. That's the sound that you probably hear in the background.
So for people who love adventures, who want to go on not extravagant tours, but just explore the natural beauty of the countryside, of the mountains and the rivers, Vietnam has a lot of that. So in the north, we have the northern mountainous regions where you can find very unique things like terraced rice fields. So people would grow rice on the mountains by basically, in Vietnamese we call it ruộng bậc thang. Ruộng is farm or field, and bậc thang means what do you call that? When you go up and down the stairs, like risers. So we would call them riser fields because it looks like, steps or stairs that you're going up or down, and that's a very beautiful sight once you get to see it. It's especially if you go there during the harvesting season when all the rice turns yellow, and you get this mixture of green and yellow on the hillside of a mountain. It's just an absolute wonderful scene to see. Also, a lot of people who like hiking would probably like to go to that area as well. There are a lot of great hiking routes that you can take. One of the biggest tourist sites in the northern mountainous regions is Sapa. It is a mountainous town, and next to Sapa is the tallest mountain in the Indochina region. So you can go there. Recently they installed a cable car for those who don't want to hike, now you can just take the cable car and go all the way up to the top of that mountain.
And what's the mountain called?
Fansipan.
Oh.
Fansipan. You can Google it; it'll show up. It's the tallest mountain. It's called the ceiling of the Indochina region, and so that's in the north. And then in the central region of Vietnam, of course, we have beautiful beaches. Some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And that's not, for me, that was rated by multiple organizations and magazines all around the world. We have beaches in Danang, where we are, in Hue, in Hoi An, in Nha Trang. So those are some bigger cities. And then there are also other sites like Lungo. And also, speaking of Lungo is actually in between us here in Danang and Hue. So if you ever came to Vietnam and you wanted to take like a trip, along the coastline, you will, if you go from the north, you'll first hit Hue, the old Citadel of Vietnam. Lots of good food, lots of great historic sites to see. That's where you can still see one of the old castles, old citadels, we call them, right? And some of it was destroyed in the war, sadly, but some of it still remain, and they're trying to renovate the place. So you can go there and see a lot of the cultural, historic sites of Vietnam from back in the dynasty area. So after you go past Hue, you get to Lungo, which is a great beach, just beautiful. You get like a long sandy beach, white sand, and then you go out into the ocean. Absolutely stunning.
I was looking at some of the beaches here in Danang, and they are massive resorts that have now built up along the beaches. I mean, you could be pampered in 5-star luxury for as long as you wanted to. In my time here in Vietnam, I've been to 4 cities so far: Ho Chi Minh in the south, Hanoi in the north, Da Nang where we are in the central part, and then Hoi An, which you had just mentioned, which may actually be my favorite city that I've been to so far. Tell us a little bit about how the cities are different from each other, the different cultures, the different environments.
Yes.
A bit like saying the difference between New York City and Los Angeles, perhaps, but...
Yes, well, I mean, that alone could be, a 1-hour discussion, the differences in cultures between cities and regions of Vietnam. Because Vietnam is geographically, we are small. The size of Vietnam is probably smaller than the size of Illinois. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. However, the thing about Vietnam is we are stretched from north to south through a very long distance. So there are a lot of cultural differences between the regions just because of geographic locations. Also, there are a lot of differences between, for example, people living in the mountainous areas, or people living in the city versus people who are living in the coastal regions, who are fishermen or something.
So for people who don't know, Hanoi is the capital.
Yes.
And Ho Chi Minh is sort of the biggest city in the south.
Yes, we call it the economic hub of the country.
Ho Chi Minh.
Yes.
Which used to be called Saigon.
Yes.
And what is Hanoi known as? It's the capital. It's not the cultural hub, right? Would that be Danang or where?
You could say Hanoi is, I mean, you could say Hanoi is the political hub, and yeah, I mean, in terms of the unique things about Hanoi, it's where the government is, and people in Hanoi have this sense of how do I put it? We think that Hanoi has a lot of cultural uniqueness as a Hanoian. We want to think that way. But honestly, if I have to pick a city that is the cultural hub of Vietnam, I would say it's Hue. It's where the last dynasty of Vietnam was located, and so in terms of the length of Hue being the capital city, it was not the capital city for longer than Hanoi. Hanoi was the capital city for a very long time. However, Hue is where you still see these relics, these symbols. You know, you can still have a sense of what it's like to be a country with a king. You know, to be a country with a dynasty. So I would say if you are looking at it from the perspective of a traveler who comes to Vietnam for a visit, and you want to find the best culture, the place with, you know, the best place with the richest culture in Vietnam, I would say it's Hue City.
Listeners, we're going to be asking Gee a little bit later for his top travel tips for tourists who may be coming to Vietnam for the first time or maybe coming for a return visit. There's no better person to ask than a local, and we've got one right here, so you're going to stay tuned for that. There is only one political party here. You were talking about the government. It's the Communist Party of Vietnam. You can see red flags with the hammer and the sickle when you travel around here in the country. I notice them a lot in Ho Chi Minh, as a matter of fact. What's it like to live in a socialist country? It's socialist now, non-communist, right?
Yes, Vietnam is a socialist country. It is run by one party, which is the Communist Party, but we are a socialist country. So honestly, now that you're asking me what the difference is, what it's like living in a socialist country, that's a very tough question to answer, because when you live in a country, you just kind of take it for granted. You just kind of go, well, that's how it is, that's how life is. You don't think about it as what is it like for people who live in other countries. So for myself, when I think about living in Vietnam, it's just like, that's naturally the way life is. There shouldn't be, you know, like, there's no two ways about it. This is how I have always lived my life, and how I will keep living my life. But having lived in the States for some time, I can say there are definitely a lot of differences. Now, a lot of it probably the clearer differences you will probably see in the political systems, but honestly, I'm not the best person to ask about, you know, politics. So I'll just talk from the point of view of, you know, a person who has lived in both countries. First of all, the one thing that I find is very different in Vietnam versus living in the States is that the way that we eat food every day. In Vietnam, the mother would go to the market every day to get fresh food and cook, you know, every day for the family. We do not eat, you know, we do not cook for a week ahead of time, which is one thing that I find a lot of people in the States do, and you know, there's no like better way to do it. It's just that's how we always do it here. We like to eat everything fresh every day. So that's one thing that you will find when you come to Vietnam is the food that you eat will feel a lot fresher. And that is because even at restaurants, we adapt that same methodology. Even at restaurants, they would bring in new fresh food every day. They would go to the market every day. They never have frozen food. Okay, maybe not never, but very rarely do you have frozen food being prepared for anything. That's not really a concept that is widely applied here. Another difference in culture between Vietnam and the United States would probably be in the way that we commute every day to work. So in the States, most people have a car. In Vietnam, most people have a motorbike. And we go to work or to school or, well, not to school. You have to be 18 over to have or to drive a motorbike. But anyone from 18 over usually has a motorbike to drive around. And when I say motorbike, it's really more like a scooter or moped.
Yeah, I've got to say, I've actually never been somewhere that's had more scooters or motorbikes on the roads. And I was going to ask you about traffic, and just to let our listeners know, I hope that I'm not exaggerating, but you sort of are taking your life into your own hands when you cross one of these really busy streets at rush hour. I mean, you told me once when I said I'm going to wait for the cross lines, the crosswalk lines, there really are no lines here in Vietnam. You just sort of have to wade into traffic, keep a steady pace, and assume that they're going to weave around you. It's the most bizarre thing, but it works.
Right. So the cultural difference I was going to talk about actually was in how we handle traffic laws here, and that goes back to your question because people here, I mean, okay, in Hanoi it's really bad. People regard traffic laws as more of a guideline that you should follow, but if you don't, then maybe it's not too bad. In other parts of the country, people follow the laws better, traffic laws better. But in Hanoi, really, like zebra crossings and red lights are more of a suggestion. And you just, if you feel like stopping, you'll stop. If you feel like you want to go, you'll go. Unless you see a cop, then then you need to follow the laws.
I will have to say, probably the only city in the world that I've been in, and I've been in 60 countries, where people disregarded the traffic laws more was actually Mexico City, where it was even worse or more free flowing.
Hard to imagine.
I know it was crazy, but I mean here seeing a car going the wrong way down a one-way street or any of that, it's not unusual. It happens. Talking about culture.
And sorry, before you go to that, I just don't want to paint a bad picture of Vietnam for whoever's listening right now. I don't want them to think of going to Vietnam as like your ticket to hell. But do be aware that when you go to Vietnam, especially if you're going to visit Hanoi, that you want to be careful around traffic. And I'm just going to give a quick tip for crossing the street in Hanoi. And you lightly touched on this earlier, but when you get to a crossing, first of all, you don't need to be on the zebra crossing line because being on the zebra crossing line actually sometimes might be counter-effective. And the reason for that is people sometimes run the red light. And when they do run the red light, if you are crossing at the zebra crossing, you're kind of expecting that people will stop. So you're not thinking that you need to watch how people are driving. So you are letting your guard down, and that's when the worst can happen. So always be on your toes when you are on the street. That metaphor didn't work so well, but just keep an eye out all the time. And the general rule is, if you're going to cross the street, look on the side where traffic is coming from. So if you're crossing the street and traffic's coming from the right, look on the right, and then when you cross half the street, now traffic's coming on the left, then turn left. And if you see people coming, just coming at you, don't be scared, especially if it's a bike. Don't be scared, because bikes will always expect that you will keep moving slowly. Now, don't run. You don't want to run, but keep moving forward slowly. Bikes will avoid you and go behind your back, or they will leave enough room in front of you that you can still kind of keep going slowly. The only exception to that rule is if you see a car coming at you, and he doesn't have, because cars are bigger and streets in Hanoi are very small, so cars won't have a lot of room to avoid you. So if you see a car, don't stand in front of it.
And that was a preview to Gee's tips for Vietnam that we're going to have a little bit later here in this podcast. One of probably the most important tips, which is navigating traffic here as a pedestrian. Talking about the culture, I have been struck as a foreigner, as a Westerner, at how gracious and welcoming the people in Vietnam are. And I'm not talking about people associated with the network where I'm teaching or anything like that, but it's the people that I interact with walking to the gym or walking to a restaurant, or speaking to somebody in a store, getting some water. I was in Ho Chi Minh for the first week of my time here, and I'd get up really early to go to the gym. And the first day I left the hotel, I was going to walk a couple blocks. There was this guy circling around really early in the morning on this big bike with the big wheels.
We call those Cyclos.
Cyclos.
Yes.
Almost something out of like a circus. It was very impressive that he could stay up on it. And he waved at me and he said hello. It may have been the only English word, I don't know. I only know 2 words in Vietnamese. One is xin chào, which is hello. So I said xin chào back to him. And he said hello back to me. And I said xin chào back to him. And he rode parallel with me as I was walking. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not really sure what's happening here, or why is he following me? He would ride ahead of me and block traffic at every intersection as I would cross, as a protective measure. He was looking out for me. I'd go into the gym, it'd be about an hour and a half, whatever. I would come out and he was waiting there to escort me back to the hotel. This went on for 4 or 5 days in a row. And I'm struck by that welcoming nature that I have felt from the Vietnamese. I almost sort of feel as though they're a little pleasantly surprised or taken aback that so many people would consider their country a destination for tourism. I've just felt very welcoming, and I don't know, maybe that's just my impression, but you can probably shed more light on it.
Right, so in Vietnam, from very early on, from a very young age, we are always taught to be kind to others. It's part of our culture, it's part of who we identify ourselves as. We want to be very welcoming to, and it's not just for foreigners, it's not just that we are welcoming foreigners to the country, it's really for any stranger that you can meet during the day, or when you go to work, or you see someone who comes to your house who is a friend of your parents that you don't know, you still greet them, you still say hello, and you ask them how they're doing. So a part of it is the culture that we were born in, which is deeply rooted in the Confucius culture that we share with a few other countries like China, like South Korea. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is that in Vietnam, we are, again, we 40, 50 years ago, we were a country affected by the war. We were so poor that at that time, foreigners being in Vietnam was a good sign. It was a sign of people are coming here to help, make the economy better. Tourism activities were such a great factor to helping our country further develop, to helping the economy become better, meaning people will have better lives. So it's just, at one point, right, that kind of image of a foreigner being in Vietnam became such a welcome sight that we just kind of feel like, oh, there's a foreigner, it's such a great thing, we welcomed you here. And we always try to be as gentle, as polite as possible toward any foreigner that comes to Vietnam ever since that time. So I think there are multiple reasons why that happens, but each of them adds up to what we have now, which is generally people are very nice to each other. If you see each other on the, if you see a stranger on the street, especially if it's a foreigner, you always try to help them out. Do you know where you're going? Do you need any help? We will. I hope we will continue to be that way. And I don't see any reason why that would change.
Listeners, we are coming to you here from along the Han River in Danang. It is an absolutely beautiful night. It's probably about 78 or maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit, a little bit humid, but there's a wonderful breeze, maybe about 10 miles per hour. There are wonderful lights on the bridges here spanning the river. One of the bridges that we're near is known as the Dragon Bridge, which spouts fire from the head of the dragon on Saturday and Sunday nights. Let's talk about the currency here in Vietnam. First day I was here, I think I went to a restaurant to get food, and they said, okay, that'll be 80,000 dong. And I said, 80,000 dong! And I started like almost, I was ready to argue with the restaurant. It can't be that expensive, right? This is Vietnam, I thought things were affordable. And then, I break out my handy currency converter on my iPhone, and it's like, $4 or $3.89 or whatever it was. So this currency, you just have a lot of zeros on the end of your currency.
Yes. I don't really know how we got to this point, and honestly, I feel like we should just drop the 1,000 and just go with instead of 80,000, that's 80 dong. But not too long ago, during my parents' time, so 40, 50 years ago, the currency then was like you get maybe an ice cream for 5 dong, right? That's how much it has changed. Now an ice cream is 10,000. So that's how much.
Which is still about 50 cents.
Yes. So honestly, I haven't researched it enough to know why the currency got inflated so fast, so quickly. But I think it must have something to do with the the development of the country after the war. And if you want to know the specific exact answer to that, I'll have to do some more research and get back to you.
Well, I tell you, no matter the reason, it is jarring when you're trying to rent a car and they tell you it'll be 1 million dong, yes, until you figure out it's like $45 or something, and then you're like, okay. Try
booking hotel and it'd be, for 3 days, and then the price be like, 20 million dong, and you're like, what?
It still kind of shocks you a bit. Now, I've tried a lot of foods since we've been here. In fact, we just had dinner earlier of these rice cakes, which are not like rice patties that you would think of. Some of these foods I can't even pronounce. So what are the foods in Vietnam that visitors must try?
Wow, that's such a tough question. You've been asking a lot of tough questions today.
we get paid by the question here at the Voyage Report.
Okay.
But you've been taking me to basically eat new foods every day.
Yes. And again, that's one great thing about Vietnam is our food is there's such a wide variety on the food that we eat, and it's not just a wide variety of foods in the country. It varies by the region as well. So if you're in Hanoi, the most famous food in Hanoi is pho, which probably so many people know all around the world. But when you eat pho in Hanoi, it's still very different from the pho that you would have, in other countries.
And for the people who have not had it, and you can get it in the United States and other Western countries, but what is it?
Pho is a noodle dish, flat noodle with either beef or chicken, and you have it with a broth that is made from usually bone, steam bones, and you leave it overnight for the broth to become really sweet with the sauce from the bones themselves. So pho is not a dish that originated from Hanoi. However, even right now, researchers still cannot find really where pho came from. It's very hard to track back to the dates during and before the war. A lot of documents were lost and all that. So pho nowadays is considered definitely a northern dish. We know it comes from the north. However, we can't identify whether it was Hanoi or Nam Ding or other regions that originally made it. However, Hanoi is considered now where the best pho is in the country. And just to demonstrate the variety of food, pho in Hanoi is very different from pho in Ho Chi Minh City and Saigon.
Sort of maybe like deep dish pizzas in Chicago is different from the pizza that you would get in New York or LA.
Yes, much like that. And if you're a Hanoian like me, you can't eat pho in Ho Chi Minh City. It just doesn't work.
So we had really interesting rice cakes here in Danang. Not really like the beef patty looking rice cake that you might think of in the U.S. This was very soft, meat embedded in the middle. What would I get in Danang that would be traditional from the central part of the country, and what would I get in Ho Chi Minh? Okay,
Danang has a couple of very traditional dishes that came from the central region. One of it is chicken rice. Chicken rice is, and there are multiple ways to cook this dish, but the Hoi An way actually. So Hoi An and Danang are two cities that are very close to each other, and Hoi An chicken rice is very famous. Danang chicken rice is also famous, but it's prepared differently. And personally, I prefer Hoi An chicken rice. And especially if you don't like chickens with the bones on it, then Hoi An chicken rice is perfect for you. It's shredded chicken, and the chicken is marinated, cooked, marinated, and then added with herbs and leaves. And then after that, you eat it. You eat the chicken with rice, and it's a special type of rice that they only have here in the central region. And then they make a special sauce. It's a bit spicy and sweet, and it's very good. It just kind of melts off your tongue. And you have to eat it kind of warm. If you eat it cold, it won't be any good.
I think I'm getting hungry again. In Ho Chi Minh, in the southern part of the country, yes, what would be the foods there that we would...
One of my favorites, again, is a rice dish. And this is a dish that, again, the type of rice in Ho Chi Minh City that they make for this is called broken rice. And it's also kind of unique to that region. So again, you see the variety. It's all rice, but in Hanoi we have different types. Danang and Ho Chi Minh City have different types. And in Ho Chi Minh City, broken rice, you have it with basically just anything. But this rice is so special. It's very dry, the rice itself. So you know how usually the rice is very sticky and the individual rice, what do you call it, seeds, stick with each other. But with this kind of broken rice, it's like every individual piece of rice is all separate, and you don't get this kind of stickiness in your mouth. However, each piece of rice is still very, it's not hard, or it's still very soft, and just very different from the rest that you have elsewhere. So broken rice, and you have it with either some kind of caramelized pork, or chicken or fish. It goes along with very well with about anything.
Now that we've made our listeners very, very hungry, let's talk a bit about you. You're 27 years old.
Yes.
You have 2 kids, wife. You live in Hanoi. Mm-hmm. What's it like to raise young children in Vietnam?
What is it like to raise young children in Vietnam? Well, the first thing that I would say is great about raising young children in Vietnam is you always have your family support. So the culture of Vietnam is that you always, like in a family, you always support each other, the parents, the children, the grandchildren, and so on. It's very common for a Vietnamese family to have 3-4 generations live in the same house. So that is one thing that I find. It could be a pro and a con at the same time, of course, because when you're raising your child, sometimes you have to be strict with them. But then when the grandparents are always around, it's hard to do that, right? The kids always have someone to run to, someone to comfort them. And so if you want to be strict with them, it's hard. But on the flip side of the coin, when something bad happens, like if you're sick or if you have to go on a trip far away, like what I'm doing right now, then your parents, which are the children's grandparents, will always have someone, will always be around to help take care of the kids. So that's one great thing about raising children in Vietnam. The cons of raising children in Vietnam is, especially for me living in Hanoi, the city has become very polluted recently. There have been a lot of reports going around about how bad the air quality is dropping. So that is one thing that personally I really wish could be different, because now when we want to take the kids outside, right, just to run around on the play yard or something, we have to hesitate. We have to say to ourselves, do we want them to experience the fun of being a child, or do we want their health to be affected? And that's a tough choice, which nobody wants to make. But other than that, I find having a kid in Vietnam is and I think in general is great. It's a lot of fun, and you get to it's a kind of an opportunity for a family to get together, have something to talk about, and for my parents and I, before we didn't used to talk very much, and now after I have kids, we start being able to talk more, and it helps connect the family more. So I find it it's a great environment to have a kid here. I don't see any big problem with it.
Listeners, it's time now to give you some tips for visiting Vietnam. And before I ask Gee for his local perspective, let me just give you my perspective, which is, of the 4 cities that I've now been to in Vietnam, I have to say that I actually loved Hoi An, which is very near to us here in Danang, maybe about a 30-40 minute drive away. I loved Hoi An the best because, to me, I felt like I was in a small town, ancient city. There are lanterns that span these small, some of them stone streets. All the lanterns light up at night. You have this wonderful night market that is on an island right there in Hoi An, and you just feel as though I'm walking back into a painting almost of Vietnam, and I just found it very charming. Obviously there's a lot of tourists. They made me pay, I think, the equivalent of $5 to walk around the old city as a quote-unquote donation.
Yes.
But I just felt that it was very charming, and if I had to come back to Vietnam, I would definitely, that's one of the places that I would want to come back to. But you're the local here, so let's start with the tourists who have never been to Vietnam, and then we'll ask you for those who have been here before. What are your top tips for visiting for someone who has never been to the country?
So do you want to know the top tips for like what to do here or where to visit?
Well, where should they visit, and once they get there, what should they do?
Right. So first of all, where to visit. If you have never been to Vietnam before, definitely want to check out Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Danang, and Halong Bay.
Halong Bay is off the coast of Hanoi.
Yes. It's about 3 hours drive from Hanoi. So Halong Bay can be a one-day trip. When you're in Danang, you can visit Hoi An, which is another one-day trip. And Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, just because if you have never been to Vietnam, then that's where you should start. So that you can get to know the culture, know the people, know the country. And then once you know what the country is like, what the people are like, then you can start exploring more remote areas or more places that are not as big of a city, like Ninh Bình or Sapa, which I mentioned earlier, or in the south there's Mũi Né, Phan Thiết, and a bunch of other places. But definitely start with the big cities.
And for those people who don't speak Vietnamese like me, I have found that a lot of places will have like English subtitles on the menus, for example, on the signs. Obviously, I've been very fortunate to have you with me most of the time, but when I ventured out on my own, I have noticed that either there's English on the menus, for example, at restaurants, or there are pictures of what you would order. So I haven't found as though I would be totally adrift if I didn't know Vietnamese.
Yes, we try to be very open and welcoming to tourists who come into the country. Now, when it comes to tips for what you should do and what you should not do, first of all, you don't have to really worry about being proper in Vietnam. As in, you most likely won't offend anyone if you do something, if you come up to them and ask them a question or take their photo, you won't offend people. We are generally, Vietnamese people are very nice, and they won't be offended if you just want to take a photo, or if you want to ask people for things, for directions, for help. Things that you should do in Vietnam is you should try sitting on a little stool on the sidewalk, on the street. Have some iced tea. Just eat some local street food. Those are probably activities that a lot of most Vietnamese people would do like every day. And if you don't try it, at least try it out, then you're missing out on a big part of our culture.
Our putt 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 loud cruise ship motor is back, as our listeners might be able to hear. You took me to a restaurant in Hanoi that President Obama had gone to, sort of made famous on the CNN Anthony Bourdain episode. Would you recommend that tourists go there, and what is the name of that restaurant? I
would definitely recommend tourists go there. It is one of the unique specialty dish of Hanoi. The name of the restaurant is Bún Chả Hương Liên, and if you look it up, it's B-U-N space C-H-A Bún Chả. That's the name of the dish, and then Huong Lien is the name of the restaurant. Is H-U-O-N-G space L-I-E-N.
And if you get lost, you can just ask where the Obama combo is, right? Because it's on the menu.
Exactly. The Obama combo is on the menu, and his pictures are all along the wall on that restaurant. Now, that restaurant was already kind of well known before he came there, but ever since he visited, man, it's just packed day in and day out. There has been no rest for those guys.
Listeners, you may be hearing the squeaking. We have a very two very cute children here who are playing in the background with squeaky tennis shoes. Real quick before we move on, in Ho Chi Minh, there is a War Remnants Museum with captured American helicopters, tanks, and they present a different point of view of the Vietnam War than American children have grown up learning. A lot of it is true, just told from a different perspective, so that might be a place that Westerners may want to check out as well. That's right there in the central part of the city. Any other tips for tourists? How about those who have been to Vietnam before? Maybe they've stuck to those major cities. You would urge them to get out and explore in the countryside.
Yeah, I would definitely urge them to try out new things. Maybe go on, in Vietnam we have a term called phượt, and it's basically when you hop on a motorbike, maybe go in a group, maybe go by yourself, and just kind of ride, for however long you want to. Go see different parts of the country. The rice fields are incredible. The mountainous regions are great. The coffee farms, the tea farms. We have a lot of different sites in Vietnam. Definitely a lot of natural scenes to see. So if you have already stayed in Vietnam for a long time and you have seen most of the major cities and you want to see something different, and your stomach has adapted to Vietnamese food, and you are okay with trying new stuff that is a little less safe, for first-time travelers, then you can try out, more remote areas, and you will find, one thing you will find is that people there are very welcoming. they will invite you into their homes. They will invite you to have dinner with them. Whatever they're having that day, you have it with them. And generally, the further out you go from the city, the more warmth and kindness and welcome you're gonna feel from the local people. At least that's been my experience. And I'm a Vietnamese, I'm a local, and I still feel that way. So for a foreigner, you will definitely get that experience even more than I did.
Listeners, if you want to look up some of the places that Gee described here, you don't have to worry about trying to spell it. We're going to put it all on our Vietnam destination page at voyagereport.com and voyagereport.com/destinations/Vietnam. Gee Nguyen is our guest today, my wonderful translator here for my time in Vietnam. Thanks so much for sharing your insights into your country and for being so gracious to us.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to have been on this podcast.
Listeners, are you ready to visit Vietnam? Have you already been? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Kamun and bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.